Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started today. My name is Eric Wolf. I'm Deputy Executive Director of the Washington State Workforce Training and Education Coordinating Board. Thank you for joining us today on our wrap up of a series of 4 rural community vitality forums, which we were able to facilitate across the state during the last month with the generous support of the Department of Labor and Mayor, a national consulting firm. Today's presentation is going to be a wrap up and summary of the themes and strategies that we heard in various rural communities across the state. It will be primarily hosted by 2 of our consultants who joined us out here in the state of Washington over the last month and helped us develop and synthesize some of the strategies we will be sharing with you today. I'd like to introduce first Beth Brindley, Vice President of Workforce Innovation at Mayor, her colleague Lori Collins, another consultant also from Mayor, and our third team member who's working on support for this webinar today, Ingrid Schoenfeld, also of Mayor. Before we jump in, though, we'd love to see who has joined us today, who's in the room with us. A note, there is an option in your virtual meeting screen to use either a chat function or a Q&A function. For today's meeting, we're only going to be using the chat box and not the Q&A function. So if you wouldn't mind going ahead and testing out that chat box, we'd love to hear who you are, who you represent, what sector you're from, and also what geographical part of the state you're from. We'll go ahead and give people a few minutes to do that as we run through the introductory slides. Today's objectives are to do a wrap up of the 4 different rural convenings that occurred in the last month. Our team and the Mayor team were really lucky to visit 4 different communities across the state of Washington, extremely diverse economically, demographically, certainly geographically. We started our tour out in Toppenish. We were then able to visit Aberdeen and the Grays Harbor communities on the coast before heading clear across the state out to Colville in northeast Washington. And finally, just the week before last, we had an excellent meeting out in Quincy, not too far from our current location in Wenatchee here in the Columbia Basin. Today's objectives are to synthesize what we heard in our conversations with these 4 very different rural communities. We were lucky enough to identify some common themes in all 4, but we also found very different needs in all 4 communities. Washington being such an economically, geographically, and demographically diverse state, we feel it's very important to share those with you as well. But really, this is about starting a conversation with stakeholders in those communities and elsewhere throughout the state as we enter into a year of strategic planning for many state-level agencies engaged in workforce and talent development. We really do want this to be the start of that conversation. Throughout our presentation today, we'll be soliciting your input. So please be generous about adding your thoughts in the text box, the chat box that's provided today. There's also a web address. If you're watching this as a recorded video, if you have any thoughts specifically about recommendations or goals that you hear about today and you want to contact our staff in Olympia, please do so. We will show the web address a little bit later on in the presentation as well. But it is workforce, WORKFORCE, at wtb.wa.gov. Just go ahead and please put rural community forums in the subject line so we can be sure to get back to you quickly. Today's agenda, we will talk about state and local planning processes for workforce development and how that can produce a profound impact in your rural communities going forward. We want to talk about the purpose and structure of the series of forums that the Workforce Board and consulting team hosted over the last month. We're going to be presenting with you the different key themes and observations from those forums, as well as some strategies that have germinated out of those forums that we may be able to address in future planning processes at the state level. We're going to ask you to tell us, did we find the right themes? We want your validation to continue that conversation, solicit your feedback and input on what we uncovered in our tour across the state. We want to share with you the next steps for how these discoveries might shape future policy solutions and initiatives for the state going forward. So we'll turn very quickly to the planning process at the state level. So you have a little bit of context about why these forums and where we will go from here with your input. The state strategic plan for workforce development is called Talent and Prosperity for All. The state of Washington had this Talent and Prosperity for All plan in effect in 2016. It is a federally required strategic plan that the state must do in order to receive workforce development funds from our federal agency partners. It sets a vision and goals for the whole fleet of social service agencies and education agencies at the state level that provide support and education and training programs for job seekers, and also support for businesses that are looking to recruit and retain talent in Washington. The plan was first put into place in 2016. And we're called on to do a 4-year planning process, or roughly a 4-year planning cycle. We're just entering in a new planning cycle in 2020 where we're doing a deep dive on the goals and initiatives in the previous version of the plan. And with an eye towards refining goals, but also identifying where we can make a bigger impact and achieve a new impact in the plan. One of our key discussions over the previous few years has been a recognition of the fact that Washington State, while it is enjoying an incredible period of economic prosperity, when you look at numbers in the aggregate or at the statewide level, when we do a deep dive on rural communities in particular, we found that much of the economic prosperity we've seen, particularly in urban regions of the state, hasn't flowed outwards into our rural communities as well. We'd really like to use this process, and we've intended to use this process of rural community convenings as a way to open a dialogue about what's working and what isn't, specifically in rural areas across the state, so that we can be mindful going forward as we do another planning process, that there is still work to be done for many of the communities in Washington, even as we are in a period where the numbers show that we are having one of the most incredible, profound economic boom times that our state has ever experienced. Our Talent and Prosperity for All plan will be going up to the federal government in spring of 2020 for their review and approval. But before we do that, our agency, the Workforce Training and Education Coordinating Board, is really adamant about ensuring that we have conversations with communities across the state so that we have the right goals set. In our planning process in 2016, we ran a series of community listening tours, which we will be doing again in the fall of this year. We'll lay that out later. At the end of this presentation, we'll explicitly lay out some points of future engagement where you can help us influence and refine the goals of the plan. We'll also tell you about local planning processes that happen closer to the ground in different geographic regions of the state where you can also achieve an impact and influence how goals and strategies on how both federal and state workforce and education funds and training programs are leveraged in your local community. Next slide. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth Brindley, who has led our facilitation team over the last month. Beth and Lori, the team are going to share the different learnings that we heard from 4 communities across the state and also invite your feedback. Beth?
Thank you so much, Eric, and good morning, everyone. Thrilled to be with you from beautiful Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, with Lori Collins, my colleague. And we just wanted to first just say this is all about you and meeting your community's needs for the long term in regard to talent development and economic vitality. So we're thrilled to share what we've heard to date through this venture, and looking forward to your thoughts and inputs as we move along. First of all, just wanted to talk about the purpose of the meetings, and Eric gave a wonderful opening to some of this, but we wanted to make sure that we truly understood in your voice the distinct economic and workforce development hopes and dreams. What are some of the key things that will move your community towards economic vitality goals that you've set? Also to identify great strategies and tools for increasing economic vitality, and then also gather your big ideas to help shape that policy over the next 4 years. And speaking for the team, we were certainly overwhelmed and excited about all the thoughts, the insights, and the solutions that you shared with us as we traveled among the 4 communities and saw so much of your beautiful state. We were specifically using a structure to make sure that we heard the unique needs of our business colleagues across the state through breakfast structure. And then we then held community vitality forums for all of the stakeholders within the community. If you were a part of one of the forums, then you know we use individual, small, and large group responses to open-ended questions to gather your input, and then we use some grouping exercises to prioritize and do the strategic development. And we really did have an opportunity to hear loud and clear from each and every one of you about what is important in your community, what's key to your workforce development success, and the quality of life in your community of place in your rural communities. And so we're thrilled to share the feedback with you. First, we wanted to just dive into some of the overarching themes that we heard from the 8 sessions, both the business breakfast and the community vitality forums in our 4 locations. And we wanted to share those broad overarching ones before we dive into the specific responses by community and overall by businesses and the community as a whole. So first of all, we see that local and regional rural economies need to be diversified to be recession-proof and to recruit and keep talent. And there were a lot of really creative ideas from tourism and other ventures to diversify the economy. So much of the economy is agriculture-based and manufacturing-based, and so the opportunities to diversify are important. The second overall theme was government's laws and regulations are designed for urban areas and inadvertently hamper rural growth and development. And that's such a key message that I know that the Workforce Board will be articulating with the state agency partners as they move forward. There is also an important message that the business community sent to us about having a unified approach, or speaking in one voice, if you will, between education, workforce development, and economic development with the business community. So many of our rural businesses are small businesses, and the CEO and the CFO and the HR manager are the same person. And so it's so important that our business liaisons to rural small businesses need to work in collaboration and in a consultative approach with the business community. And we'll see more about that a little later. Another key theme is career-connected learning and paid work experience, OJTs and apprenticeships that can fill the talent void when traditional education options aren't accessible. And then also that is an avenue to re-engage youth in our rural communities. And so we are thrilled to think about that with you and how a work-based learning ecosystem could really play an important role in that. The next key theme that we heard was the need for study and understanding of societal issues in a rural context. There are core values in rural communities that need to be understood, valued, and appreciated, and given voice in our overall policy arena. So very important. We have a few more overarching themes. So one was a need for navigators for public services and information needed by business, workers, and communities. So recognizing that there is a vast amount of resources, grant opportunities, and what have you, but they aren't easily navigated by our business community, by job seekers and workers, and community leaders, so a potential navigator could play a role in that. Another key overarching theme, state grant opportunities don't take into consideration the challenge of rural applicants. We heard everything from we don't have a grant writer, that time frames are not feasible for us to respond given the other commitments that we have within our community and so forth as some of the challenges that rural applicants face. We heard the pros and cons of cannabis, everything from it being an economic driver while still adversely affecting the workforce and industry. Though cannabis is legal in the state of Washington, in some advanced manufacturing settings and other work environments, it still creates a safety issue that needs to be recognized. So then our next one is solution finding will result from partnerships in rural context, community, state, federal, for-profit, and not-for-profit, but public funds need to support that intermediary role. And what was really great is that in a couple of the communities, there were efforts on community collaboratives, almost like a collective impact approach to addressing some of the rural economic vitality issues. And we need to support those efforts and expand those efforts and bring all the right partners around the table. And then finally, our last overarching is a clear value proposition is needed by Washington's policymakers about the state's rural communities. And so with that said, those are the big, broad themes that we heard as traversed across your great state. So we're going to dive into some of the key rural business themes that we heard, and we want to reflect those back to you, give you an opportunity to ask any questions, provide any additional thoughts as we move forward. And so first we want to start with, what were the questions that we asked? There were 5 specific questions. Toppenish was our first location, and so we did some fine tuning after that of the questions, but these are the questions are very similar to them around hopes and dreams, fears and concerns, pain points, technology and innovation, and then how do we best support your industry sector's growth? And so those were the 5 questions, and we're going to take a moment and hope that folks that are from the employer community will take the opportunity to share some of your thoughts and respond to some of the questions if by chance you weren't able to participate. Of course, if you're viewing this as a recording, we would love your thoughts as well, and you can email us your input at workforce@wtb.wa.gov and include the virtual forum in the subject line. So, just going to take a few moments, post the questions, and give you the opportunity to type anything in the chat. Just want to do a check to make sure that folks can see my screen. If you could text us and let us know, or Eric, if you could let us know. So just checking, can folks see my screen? I can go back out and try to upload as well. Sorry for this technical difficulty. We'll just be a moment. So while they're doing that, we're going to go ahead and hope you've had the opportunity to put your questions in, and they'll bring the slides back up. Lori, would you like to proceed with the overall business perspective on hopes and dreams?
So as Beth mentioned, we asked the business community at each of the 4 business breakfasts what their hopes and dreams were for their community. Overall, we heard some themes across the state, and we want to touch on those a little bit. What the business community hopes for overall is optimal conditions for business development. They want there to be infrastructure and other things in place that allow for business development, business expansion and retention and those sorts of things. Also included in that, they want to ensure that there's the available workforce to support that. Safe communities was a theme that we heard across all 8 of the sessions, and that varied from communities that were dealing with drug issues as well as gang issues. Quality infrastructure and including, which also included affordable housing and addressing homelessness issues. That was another theme that we heard frequently. And then lastly, having a diverse economy. Washington State and some of your rural communities can definitely speak to what happens to a community that is dependent upon a single industry when that industry leaves or has an issue around regulations, and that impacts that work. And so it was stressed several times that having diversification in the economy to where hopefully the jobs would be more recession-proof and more less impacted by changes in industry. Next, some of the specific things that came out at 4 of the places, and I won't read through every one of these, but just touch on a couple of them. Toppenish was a place where we heard very clearly from both the business community as well as in the community forum that having a safe community was very important, and the elimination of gang violence and gang activity. In Colville, we heard about building bridges and collaborations with the Native communities, and that was very important and something that needed to maybe not necessarily be done better. Perhaps those are already happening, but to expand that and ensure that it happens at every possible opportunity. So seeing the above community-specific themes, if you would share in the chat feature any root causes or any things that you think that would need to be addressed in order to make these hopes and dreams be able to happen. So as you're thinking about these and you want to give us feedback, that would be welcome. The next thing that we want to share with you would be overall business perspective around fears and concerns that the business community had. A theme that we heard often was the loss of youth moving west to find jobs, moving west in the state, or possibly even leaving the state of Washington. And I would also add to this that just in general, providing programming for youth, and youth being defined as teenagers as well as perhaps young adults, just providing positive opportunities for them was something else that we heard. We heard, as Beth mentioned earlier, about addiction and drug use and safety issues that may create in the workplace, as well again as the housing, and then services just being available to support families that are trying to work or trying to get training to go to work, and those things included child care, education and education for their children, but also access to health care. Those things are secondary issues when it comes to economic development. So I think the business community was really signaling that those were key things and fears that they have that would impact their ability to grow and expand where they are. Some location-specific fears and concerns that we had. We heard in Aberdeen that there was a perception that Grays Harbor County has a negative image outside of Grays Harbor County, and so what would be some ways that that could be combated? And then something that we heard quite a bit was the lack of soft skills in workers of all ages. It wasn't limited to any particular group, but just that that's a trend that the employer community has been seeing for a while. So that was mentioned in Colville. So those were the business community's hopes and fears. Please use the chat feature to share your comments and reactions to what you've heard. Or if you are listening to this, watching this as it has been recorded, feel free to send an email with those comments. If you are an employer or an industry sector representative in a rural part of Washington, please feel free to also use the chat box to add additional notes on your hopes, concerns, business pain points, innovation, and supports that you may need for your business's growth. Next, we want to get into region-specific business perspective around what has been working to cultivate their talent development. What have they done? What perhaps has the workforce system done to support talent development strategies? And also, it's noted that we did ask unique questions in Toppenish and Aberdeen, and we've in Toppenish we asked what's working for you now, and in Aberdeen we asked what talent development strategies are working for your business today. We do believe that those questions are very similar, and so we're reporting out the results of those two questions on this one slide. As Beth mentioned earlier, we continued to refine the questions to ensure that we were getting the best possible answers back from the business community and also at the community forum. So in terms of what's working around talent development strategies, Toppenish shared with us that utilizing social media as well as staffing agencies had been something that they had noticed was working well for them. But also they were starting to feel the need to do longer range planning around their hiring needs because they were starting to feel that as a crunch, and in order to expand their business, they were going to have to look at more long range plans for their talent acquisition and talent development. In Aberdeen, we heard that benefits packages were something that they promoted and that they felt worked well to attract new employees. There was also the mention of connection to pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs within the high schools and the local colleges. It was also noted that an employer talked about redesigning workplaces and the actual bricks and mortar spaces to attract the next generation of workers. On the next slide, what's worked in the past and what happens when your needs as a business are not met. Working with trade schools and colleges to find, and that would include your community colleges, to find potential employees was mentioned as something that has worked. But also when their needs relative to talent acquisition and talent development aren't met, their ability to expand their business and to add a new line or develop a new feature, those things can't happen, which means that there are fewer work opportunities present in the community. So it tends to be a trickle-down effect, and our business partners in the Toppenish area talk to us about that. And then The issue of crime in that part of the state was noted as something that has an impact on the business community as well. And then additionally, a higher cost of goods and services, which, as we know, generally does get passed on to the consumer. And so there's, again, a longer term and a trickle down effect to that.
So, Lori, very quickly, we're going to take just a quick break. I think Ingrid might have some questions for us that she'd like to share.
Hey guys, it's Ingrid Schoenfield in California. Thank you for your presentation thus far. I just want to note that I know that you're having some technical difficulties there, but there are a couple of questions came in. I want to make sure we address them. So first of all, Erin mentioned that because we had technical difficulties, they couldn't see the first overall business theme slide. So would you mind backing up and just taking a look at those overall themes?
Actually, we're gonna have them again later in the PowerPoint. So when we do the summary at the end, do you think that would work for folks?
Yeah, Erin, let us know if that will work. Also, Erin noted, or Jordan noted, that there's much more than just agriculture concerns to be addressed in the Quincy Forum. So if there's anything else in particular you'd like to share with the group now, Jordan, that'd be fantastic. I think that those are all the questions we have thus far.
Great. Thank you so much, Ingrid. And
Sure.
Erin, we are delighted you want to see those slides, and we will preview them again as we wrap up the webinar. We're going to move in now to the overall business perspective when it comes to pain points. And as you can see, there are a few here. One that sparked a lot of discussion in one community was around wages, where some of the businesses felt that they weren't paying a family sustaining wage in the rural communities, and that we needed to reevaluate that. And then there were other folks in the community who felt strongly that if wages went up, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to continue with their existing business model. So I think where we got to was the importance of striking the right balance between businesses' needs and new workers' expectations, and meeting the family sustaining wage needs and issues along the way. Another consistent theme or pain point that we heard was around the lack of soft or work readiness skills, and that is not only an issue we find in rural Washington state, but I think that across the country, that is one of the most consistent business messages that we hear. Another pain point that we've heard about included drugs, housing, transportation, and related issues. So recognizing the impact of drugs, whether it was the gang issues that we heard about in Toppenish, or violence in other communities related to drugs, and the importance of a quality of place infrastructure around housing, transportation, childcare, and you'll see more about this as we move forward through this process. Let's talk about a few of the specific regional issues in Colville and Quincy in particular here. One theme that we heard was about how difficult it was to bring trainers and consultants in to help address the management and staff skill issues in some of the businesses. And so we need to really think about some creative methods and opportunities for being able to provide support in areas. Another in Colville was the lack of awareness of what occupations and jobs are available, and little OJT opportunities to test out possible jobs. OJT being on-the-job training, and it's a wonderful tool for a trial between a business and an individual, where the individual learns parts of the job on the job and in the context of the work environment. Also allows someone the opportunity to determine whether the organizational culture is the right fit for them. Then in Quincy, the drug issue that we talked about as a pain point came up very loud and clear about workers not being able to pass drug tests or background checks. And so there were some creative strategies that we'll hear about later about how we might be able to tackle that. And then, of course, the high cost in dollars and time for certification and licensing requirements that can certainly pose a problem. I'm going to stop here for just a moment and give you an opportunity to use the chat feature to share any thoughts or ideas that you have in regard to the pain points we covered or others that may be taking place that you'd like to weigh in on. And then also, if you're participating via a recording, you can also do that through email and put virtual forums in the subject line.
And Beth,
All
this
right.
is Ingrid. While I'm monitoring the chat and notice that there are quite a few really good points that are coming in. Margie Hall mentioned that there's a shortage of housing and childcare services, and these issues affect employers' ability to recruit and retain talent. And also, there's a lack of available commercial and industrial buildings to house new built businesses. And there's also the issue of properly zoned greenfield properties to build new facilities. And that she also mentioned that there's recent studies about using facilities at our fairgrounds to provide buildings. So it's a really interesting, innovative approach, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Reuse and reimagining old buildings is really a core opportunity. And definitely the child care issue and others are themes that we heard loud and clear. And we'll be talking a little bit more about some of the creative strategies that folks in the forums had. So thanks, Ingrid.
Sure.
We'll move forward.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can I mention one more thing from Jordan, which I thought was interesting? Jordan,
Absolutely.
thank you. Jordan mentioned in the chat too that funding for training is needed, and that they try to work with SBCTC to bring in as many training dollars to the area as possible. And just was posing that not sure if all employers are aware of the capabilities of local community colleges. I just want to put that out there. I know we've got some folks representing business in our virtual room right now, so I would love to hear what their thoughts are.
Sure, and we had a number of community college participants in our community forums, and so we'll see some great ideas and suggestions that came forward out of that. So let's shift into the overall business perspective in regard to technology and innovation. One of the key themes was that businesses now require a wider range of technical skills in the same worker. So it's really important to think about incumbent worker training and how we can upskill the existing workforce to embrace new technologies, while also knowing that businesses may not be able to overhaul all their technology. So there are some expectations and opportunities for young workers to still learn on legacy systems and be able to manage there. Another theme that I thought was interesting here was the need to address the fear of adopting technology on both the small business owner side and the workforce side. And sometimes our small business owners are reluctant to invest in new technology just because they are not familiar with it and it progresses so rapidly. And then also, and the workforce that has been with a small business for a long time may be reluctant to embrace. Sometimes our children and grandchildren are some of the best folks to help us and teach us and embrace new technology and how it can transform our productivity in the workplace. The last bullet I thought I would touch on here is that the education system isn't keeping up with technical training needs. And that really is a great place for opportunity for partnership between business and the education system, because sometimes the companies can invest in new technology and they can work out a relationship with the education community to create exposure to that new equipment. And so those partnership themes will surface a little later in our discussions as well. So let's talk about some of the specific issues around technology and innovation that came up from our communities. So in Aberdeen, workers in manual labor jobs have an iPhone mindset, making it hard to adapt to physical work requirements of many jobs. And so just recognizing that there's the striking that balance, right, between technology and the physical labor that some of the jobs require, I think is an important thing to keep in mind. And then in Colville, the lack of opportunities to experience and understand computer logic systems, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And so having those hands-on learning opportunities, that's where on-the-job training and apprenticeships and other things can really bring about the type of exposure that some of the employers in Colville raised around this issue. There are a few more ideas here. In Toppenish, they spoke to really that youth need more technology-based opportunities and career exploration to inspire them around career and learning paths. And I think there are some great tools that the Washington Council has put together that could help with learning more about that and those career exploration opportunities. So with that, I want to take just a moment to give an opportunity for folks to put in any questions or any other thoughts or responses to some of the overall or the regional specific themes around technology and innovation and how it's affecting rural business. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Lori.
Okay, so now we're going to look at what, from the business perspective, what can we do to support their industry needs? And I apologize for the sirens you're hearing in the background. I'll wait till those pass. Some of the key themes that we heard across the 4 locations was that business thought that it was important that communities know all about available grants and resources to support businesses. So the business needs to know what's available, but they think that it's also important that the communities know that as well. They stress the importance of teaching work readiness skills and that they need workers who want to work, not just workers who may want to work for a day or who may want to work to fulfill a requirement of a program, but for individuals who truly had a desire to obtain employment and begin along a career path. Investment in infrastructure, housing, transportation, broadband, and supportive services was key. Promoting opportunities in the trades and expanding pre-vocational training and work-based learning. We heard this mentioned several times, and also it was also brought up about changing the perception of working in the trades, that it's no longer, for whatever our perceptions may have been previously, working in this type of work requires advanced skill these days. And so beginning to change that perception among people about what it means to be an electrician and a plumber and a tool and die maker and those sorts of things. And then promote and incentivize relocation of skilled workers to rural areas. This really spoke to the idea that living in a rural community, that there's a quality of life there that doesn't exist in an urban area, and how can we promote that, and not just in word but also in deed? What can we do to make sure that there perhaps are incentives for workers to do that? Some of the more location-specific things that we heard around this from Aberdeen, they talked a lot about seed money for startup businesses and how entrepreneurs are the ones who are driving innovation, or to drive innovation in existing business. When the country came out of the recession a few years ago, or began to change after the recession a few years ago, we saw the biggest growth in small business and medium-sized business, and I believe that what we were hearing from the employers in the Aberdeen area was being able to invest in entrepreneurs who are going to probably start small and then grow their business. They're going to be the ones who add jobs most often. And how can we support that? In Colville, we heard about the expansion of pre-vocational training opportunities to ensure success for workers on registered apprenticeship paths. And we heard quite a bit about how do we change the rules to ensure that registered apprenticeship is a viable option and that there's not a unintended disincentive for the employer community to actually use registered apprenticeship. In Quincy, they talked to us about clear and ongoing communication channels with education and training to ensure that those communication channels exist between the business community and the education and training community so that the business community can inform the education and training community about pathways and help build those pathway structures to prepare the emerging workforce. And then in Toppenish, they talked to us about economic tools and incentives such as TIF financing or tax increment financing and opportunity zones, which are things that have worked around the country in some rural areas. And so there's some opportunities there that would perhaps take legislative action to make those things happen, but setting the tone and creating a conducive environment from Olympia to allow for those things to happen. That was something that we heard. So at this point, use your chat feature to share your comments and reactions to what you've heard. If you're an employer, an industry sector representative in a rural part of Washington, please feel free to just let us know maybe what we've missed or what we weren't able to capture.
And Ingrid, why don't we give you just a moment if there's anything in the chat room before we transition into the community forum section that we'd want to hear about. Hearing nothing, I'm going to move on. Sorry again for the issue. We're having some weather issues here in Kentucky, and our connectivity is going in and out, so we apologize for that. Let's move into the community vitality facilitated discussions. Want to talk a little bit about our approach for that. First of all, we had a distinct process and a mindset that we wanted to move and use in here. We took the key themes and observations from the business breakfast and we built them into the introduction of the community forums because we thought it was important that business voice came in loud and clear as we moved into individual, small, and large reflection and discussion processes. We recorded the key themes that were shared and some of the brainstorming that went along with those key themes from the business breakfast. We asked the participants in the community forum to come to these issues with a particular mindset and approach. One was creative confidence, saying that they didn't have to know everything about all the issues in order to provide some innovative ideas and strategies to some of the challenges that businesses and community folks were experiencing around talent development and workforce development. That it was important to embrace ambiguity about how we might move forward, and then to even think back to things that we might have done in the past that may not have been successful and think about how we could iterate, refine, and improve those so that we had a spirit of optimism about where we could go and so forth. In the community forums, we had 3 specific questions that we utilized. They're right here. They're very similar to what we interfaced with on the breakfast in regard to hopes and dreams. We asked what's moving your community forward now towards vitality and prosperity, and also about what concerns that folks in the community have. And again, very thought-provoking questions And we're going to take this moment for the community partners, those of you who are not employers, if you want to reflect a little bit about those particular questions, if you want to provide your responses in the chat box, or if you're viewing or recording this as a webinar, watching this recording as a webinar, certainly you can email us at workforce@wtb.wa.gov and include virtual forum in the subject line. So here are those questions. I'm going to give you just a moment to reflect and on those questions, and if you have any thoughts, feel free to type them in the chat room. Should have a little Jeopardy music playing right about now, so folks could include those thoughts in there. With that, I'm going to move on, and Lori, if you will pick up with the facilitated discussion on hopes and dreams.
Okay, thank you, Beth. So the themes that we heard across the area, I hope none of this will come as any surprise to you. Folks want to see a diverse economy with many employment opportunities for individuals of all skill levels. I think that's an important distinction to make. Growth of a multiple range of career and technology education pathways. So what are the on-ramps to get into specific jobs, and how do we make those available to individuals? And then how do we grow those opportunities from where they are now so that there's more things available to folks that that lend itself to getting hired in the industries and jobs that are available where they are in Washington. Having collaboration between the education and training community with business to expand career exploration and hands-on training in local industries. So having those work-based learning opportunities, those things speak to relationships and partnerships. And so one of the themes that we heard was just the opportunity to grow those relationships and partnerships from the education and training side with the business community. Having a robust set of community resources that can meet all of those barriers to employment that we see oftentimes. Housing, again, was mentioned frequently. Housing, childcare, and having childcare that is available beyond 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but that is available for evening shift or night shift work, because there are jobs in communities that are around the clock, and therefore childcare is available childcare is needed at those hours as well. Quality education, mental health support, addiction prevention, treatment and recovery, and crime reduction programs, and all recognizing the link that there is between addiction and crime and those sorts of things. And then also young people seeing that where they are in their community, that they have a viable future there so that they don't feel the need to move away from their rural community. In drilling down a little bit more about having a diverse economy with many employment opportunities for individuals at a range of skills, some of the things that would support that, some strategies to help support that would be impacting the economic development efforts that are happening in the communities and at a local level, modeling programs and tools that are seen in other communities across the U.S. that may look a little bit like your community in rural Washington, doing some research and finding out what's worked other places and building on that and capitalizing on that and making that work in your community was a suggestion. Financial assistance for developers, specifically to build low-income housing. There are also models across the country that take the building of housing, low-income housing, and also turn that into a training program so that those individuals who are hired to build the housing are being supervised by journeymen who can teach them how to do that. So you're not only resulting in housing that's available in the community, but then you've also upskilled people in the community as well. Site development for growth within the economic development. So being able to develop locations that a company would want to expand or relocate to. And then, of course, building in new partnerships to bring in money and make use of federal tax laws to the advantage. Some additional strategies for the other idea noted for around hopes and dreams. So growth of career and technology education pathways. So what were some strategies that could help do that? So strong collaboration among public agencies, including schools, educational institutions, to support high school students for career exploration and careers. So the public agencies, ensuring that they're working together and collaboratively and across their organizations to be supportive of those efforts within the educational institutions that ultimately support the business, the local business. Career and technical education, apprenticeship, and other work-based learning opportunities that could be modified to support working adults and upskilling their needs. If you have a technology center that is used for high school students during the day, what is happening to that facility at night and on weekends when those high school students aren't using it? Is that an opportunity to build a training program for adults and other individuals that are non-school age in the community to utilize that resource that is sitting there during those off-school hours? School and business collaboration for both economic and workforce development. And we know that there's an intrinsic connection between the two of those with better outcomes for business that support the needs of current and future workers. And then identifying best practices, of course, from other areas. Middle and high school education focus on solving real world problems rather than abstract. And then the last hope and dream that strategies were built around was education and training entities collaborating with business to expand career exploration and hands-on training in local industries. So how do we get students and perhaps even teachers out of the classroom and into local industry so that they can get some real-life career exploration, real-life experience, some career exploration done, and so that they can learn it and feel it and see what that looks like. So just creating new options for that, and that may take a legislative change again in Olympia, but that's something that we heard. Creating new opportunities for that at the state level, developing those partnerships that serve populations with barriers, so students or individuals with disabilities, individuals that have been connected to the legal system, either with felonies or misdemeanors, both have impacts on employment. So, and of course, there are other populations with barriers, but those are just a couple that came to mind. Building partnerships and barrier reducing strategies to serve those populations is something that was suggested. And then incentives for, I'll just touch on this last one, incentives for industry professionals to teach. So taking a person who's been in a specific industry, perhaps they've been a geologist or they've worked in some sort of environmental science field. Are there easy crosswalk opportunities should that person want to go into the education setting and become a science teacher? Are there easy crosswalks for that? Is that easy to access? What can we do to ensure that those individuals who have that real world experience and then decide that they want to enter the classroom, what opportunities is there for them to be able to do that? So another hope and dream that we built strategies, or that you all built strategies around, was having robust community resources which are available to support a healthy community. So again, these are probably going to come as no surprise to anyone on the call today, but having adequate support for housing and childcare, making sure that's available, after school programs and community activities. Youth are going to connect to something, and we want to make sure that our communities are providing positive things for them to connect to. And so after school programs are one way of doing that. Accessible and affordable transportation. That's not just having a bus line, but that's having transportation that if I don't have a car, I can still get to the bus stop because there's not just one location in the community where I can go to catch the bus. So it's not just about having it, but is it accessible, and then also is it affordable? Quality education, mental health and addiction services, and I would add prevention, treatment, and intervention on that. Crime reduction programs, promoting family literacy through the use of technology supports and the public libraries that are available there. And then one of the other hopes and dreams that was mentioned is young people seeing a viable economic future for themselves and their communities. And some of the strategies that were suggested for that by the attendees would be earlier career exploration and planning for youth and their families. So let's not just wait until the 11th or 12th grade of high school to begin exploring that, but how much earlier in that K through 12 experience can we introduce career exploration and begin giving opportunities for that, and not just for that young person, but also for their families. In situations like this, I like to refer to the family as the decision committee, because the influence that the family has on a young person as they're trying to decide what to do with their life, they truly are a decision committee, and so they have influence, and so we need to impact them with information and opportunity as well. Paid work experience and work-based learning. How do we increase those opportunities, expand those, make them available to more youth at more points? Again, more about the business and community partnerships and how we really need business to be engaged, and we want them to sort of lead us. But we want them to lead us in these efforts by telling us what it is that they need and what they need from the workforce, and then the workforce system making that happen. Expanding access to youth and family behavioral health to support the mental health aspects of our folks in our communities. Gang and court diversion programs. Instead of an offense that would land a person into a incarceration, what can we do to provide a diversion activity, a diversion program that would deter recidivism, and also just help that person with other supports that they may need. And then community service learning was also mentioned as something else. So we're back to the light bulbs, and we want to just ask that if you have any input, any questions that you want to ask about what you've heard on those hopes and dreams slides, to feel free to enter that in the chat box. If you are viewing this webinar not live, but on a recorded feed, then there was an email address provided at the beginning, and we would ask that you would send your comments and questions to that email address.
Thanks, Lori. Ingrid, I'll take just a moment. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to share out of the chat room or questions?
Well, there's only one thing I wanted to share at this moment. Thank you. Is a comment from, I'm not sure if it's McCoomer or M. Coomer, about the strong emphasis on standardized testing as an indicator of school effectiveness makes it difficult to address many of the needs indicated by industry. So that's an interesting kind of barrier to being really responsive to what local businesses need. So just want to mention that and see if there's any other questions or comments. We've got some great folks here in the room.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Ingrid, and we'll keep moving along. We're now going to move into the focus on what's moving your community towards vitality and prosperity. And there were 4 overarching themes that we heard during the Community Vitality Forum. One was on improving broadband access, and that is another issue that is not just a challenge in rural Washington state, but in rural places in Kentucky and even in the big city on occasion, as we've experienced this afternoon. Another, increasing engagement of employers with education, economic, and workforce development. And again, just underscoring the importance of looking at this from the business community vantage point of having one conversation so that they can tell their story once to all the education, economic, and workforce development partners, and then rallying around together on creative solutions. The third major focus area was programs and resources to build and grow local businesses. And we heard some of that loud and clear from the breakfast meetings as well. And so we'll talk about some of the strategies that you've come up with around that. And then finally, teaching young people about careers and training pathways. So let's dive into those improving broadband access strategies. One of the most creative ones we heard was when we were in Quincy, and the suggestion was to create a Wi-Fi hotspot bus. And so you think about the mobile libraries of yonder years, and this would be a creative way to bring hotspots to some of the more rural parts of your communities, and we thought that was really creative. Some other things folks thought about were vouchers to pay for broadband, industry sponsors supporting broadband, utilizing adult education, libraries, and other venues to access broadband options, and then finally to invest in innovative efforts towards new broadband options. But we loved the creativity that you all had in this particular section. Then, as we're things that are moving the community forward around increasing engagement of employers with education, economic, and workforce development, just the strong encouragement of the development of entrepreneurial curriculum so that young people can start their new businesses early and stay in the region and have business mentors available to them to support it, which really does support the next bullet, which is creating the innovation mindset from a very early age. And then I thought the next bullet was particularly insightful, and you all had talked about the need to develop trust and learn from one another's needs. So employers, education, economic development, and workforce development need to take the time to understand their issues and challenges from their varying vantage points and come together in unique partnerships to help address those challenges. And I think that that's really important, and what opportunities like collective impact can provide a framework for doing just that. Another one that I wanted to touch on this page was the new opportunities and new models for registered apprenticeship, recognizing that the ratio of apprentices to mentors and other things can prove difficult in rural communities. And I think that this is not only an issue that's being talked about in Washington State, but in Washington, D.C. and the Department of Labor, and know that the Department of Labor is getting ready to roll out some new and streamlined efforts when it comes to registered apprenticeship and other models. So it'll be exciting to hear that when it comes out. And then finally, robust and evolving training that can meet the ever-changing needs of employers, employees, and job seekers. Technology changes faster than we can keep pace, and so we need to think about those ways to keep everyone skilled up when it comes to technology and AI and new tools that business is adopting as they're moving things forward. Our next category in moving our communities forward is programs and resources to build and grow local businesses. And another creative idea that came out of one of the forums was Shark Tank-like events where investors could build ideas and investments and better access to business capital. I think that's really important as we grow small businesses, and it's the small businesses that are the predominant businesses in rural communities. So cooperation between state, local, and federal, which allow new ideas and investments and opportunities, makes perfect sense as well. Also taking a look at pursuing in Olympia and potentially in Washington, D.C., offerings and securing tax credits for businesses, and embracing things like maker spaces and innovation labs and creating access to those. There are a number of communities that have used these types of innovation hubs to draw young people and to keep their young people in their rural communities. So I think that's a great way to just encourage young people to stay in the community and grow in the community, as well as to attract other young folks there. And then, of course, always taking a look at policy and regulation to make small business ownership easier. It's important to keep in mind. So as we move forward and moving your communities towards growth and prosperity, we're going to hone in now on teaching young people about careers and training pathways. And we were excited to see how much energy there was around job shadowing, mentorship, in-school pre-apprenticeship programs, and youth registered apprenticeship programs. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity in those education, economic development, workforce development, employer partnerships that we talked to earlier in this section to add some context and color to this. Career navigators in school, and this is one place where your workforce partners and local workforce boards can really be a resource and a help in thinking about how we might be able to meet that need. Career counseling beyond college and starting at a younger age and with families. And I think Lori made some great points about the family council. And the other thing to think about are utilizing peers, because oftentimes young people are more likely to listen to someone that's closer in age than some of us that are a little bit older. And so the power of peers, just even a few years older, can offer some opportunities around this. The next is catalog and market the existing training programs using clear visuals and social media. So thinking about career matrices, career lattices, career pathways, so folks can see the different opportunities in the different industry sectors in your rural community, what the education requirements are, what the wages, what the expectations are around those, so that they can make informed choices. And once again, Washington State has some great career advising tools that could be helpful in this arena in particular. And then finally, create opportunities for hands-on exposure for educators as well as students. So many times our educators move through their education arena and do not really have the opportunity to see how business is embracing new technologies, new tools, and new resources. So with that, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to enter some more thoughts and ideas, questions in the chat box. And of course, if you're watching this recording, you can send us an email based on that email address we shared with you earlier, and we'll share with you before we wrap up this call. So with that, Lori, I think I'm going to turn things back over to you.
All right. So continuing with the facilitated discussion, the last question that we asked in each of the 4 community forums was what were the fears and concerns that individuals had for their community, And then, so we're going to go through what those were, and then as we've done on the previous few questions, go through what were some strategies that were suggested around how to address those. So some of the overarching fears and concerns that we heard was a lack of vision and coordination among community leaders. And I would say that community leaders wasn't always clearly defined, and so that may vary from community to community as to who that is. No clear value proposition for Washington's rural communities among state policymakers. I think we heard several times in a variety of ways that folks felt that policymakers just sort of hadn't paid the right amount of attention to the rural parts of the state, and they felt like now was the time that needed to change. Drug abuse, both legal and illegal, and workers who are unable to pass a drug test. What can that mean for the future of the communities? What can that mean for the future of those individuals being able to work, their families, those sorts of things? Lack of infrastructure, including affordable housing. Again, that was mentioned numerous times. Lack of childcare and other family services to support families. And then few pathways for underemployed adults into family wage jobs. So it was the recognition that oftentimes whenever a person connects to a job that is a lower wage job, there didn't seem to be well-known pathways for that person to move out of that lower wage job into a higher wage job that would ultimately be a family sustaining wage. So perhaps those pathways are there, but they're not well known by the community, or perhaps this is an opportunity for those pathways to be created. One of the other fears and concerns, excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. I'm so sorry. Lack of vision and coordination among community leaders. So lack of coordination between government entities, both tribal and local and non-government entities. Where are there opportunities for that? Again, that can be defined within your own community about who that is and who that needs to be. Create a marketing campaign based on the vision of the rural community, including quality of life. And establish a geographically focused resource navigator position to support coordination of community resources. So the fear and concern about drug abuse, both legal and illegal, and workers who are unable to pass a drug test. Some strategies around that would be to educate the population, specifically workers, on the long-lasting effects of drug use and the impact of drugs on both the labor force and employers. This is the notion that whenever people have the right information and that information applies to them, that they are more likely to make the right choice. So increasing the education and the information sharing to individuals on that. And then also recognizing that Washington is one of the states in the country that has legalized cannabis. And so what education tools need to be made available to your citizens around that. Increase taxes on legal drugs so that could create a revenue stream, perhaps. Promote healthier coping tools and resources and mechanisms so that individuals can connect to positive things rather than connecting to perhaps negative things. Learn why drug use is rampant in rural areas, so really dig into that and look at the root causes of that. And there are other parts of the country that are also rural and are dealing with the opioid crisis, and what perhaps looking at what some of those communities have done and what those communities have done specifically within their workforce system to support and connect to the need for addiction treatment for their rural customers. And work to change federal opioid laws was the last one that was mentioned, or the last one that we'll mention. So lack of infrastructure, including affordable housing, rebuilding the existing infrastructure, investing in roads and bridges and rebuilding those things, expanding broadband. We heard that quite a bit in all of the sessions. That has an impact on a person's ability to connect to resources. But also, if you have broadband connectivity, you also open up the opportunity for individuals to work remotely. And so they may be able to work for a company based on the East Coast, but they're residing in Washington and they're working from their home. And so that opportunity doesn't exist if you don't have a broadband capability in those locations. More housing and affordable housing options, like business subsidized housing, short-term community hosts, and hotels or motels. This was an innovative idea. I'm sure that there are examples of this around the country and perhaps even internationally about how this is done, and being able to look into those and building on those opportunities. Reframing how state funding opportunities are written to encourage and support rural applications. Often, what we heard was that oftentimes whenever a state agency will issue a grant opportunity, it takes a little more effort, it seems, for a rural community to pull together an application. There may not be the resource person that you need may not be located in your community because they may cover a territory and they may be located in another part of the state at that particular time. So that's just one example, but creating opportunities with state grants that really support the rural applicants on those, and looking at how rural needs are different than urban needs, even in that application process. And then lastly, lobbying for investment in roads and distribution avenues. I think that's definitely connected to the rebuilding of the existing infrastructure that was mentioned. The lack of childcare and other family services, these are just to support those families that are working and trying to thrive. So creating community childcare site that has more open hours of operation, offering entrepreneurial training and regulation coaching and other things around what it takes to start a child care facility. So we talked a lot about, or it was mentioned a lot about just having child care available, but this is looking at it from a different perspective of creating entrepreneurs who would open those child care centers, and what regulations are in place that perhaps are unintentionally a disincentive to creating that. So we're talking about small business owners here, and what is the environment that exists that is conducive to them opening those businesses. Engaging state legislators to reduce the burden of state regulations for rural child care providers, that's the same thing. On creating or encouraging on-site child care so that a worker can bring their kids, drop them at the child care facility, and then go to their office or whatever it is that they're doing to do their work that day. Support employer subsidies for child care. No clear value proposition for Washington's rural communities among state policymakers. So state policies are often developed and aligned and evaluated to benefit the urban population centers. So ensuring that those state legislators are, and policymakers, we'll say it that way, are aware of what the rural needs are and are keeping that in mind as they're creating policy and creating opportunity, and that they are, once again, not creating an unintended disincentive for the rural communities, and that they're not, so that they're not creating an unintended disincentive. Resources from rural areas should use a different cost per formula or be made more flexible for use in the rural areas. Oftentimes, you have to build in travel costs, and if you're in a rural area, that travel may be more lengthy. That's just one small example of how rural costs may be more. But looking at that, and grant opportunities often have a cost per component to them, and realizing that if it's limited to a dollar amount, that you might be unintentionally disincentivizing a rural applicant. The role of intermediary organizations. to have access to sustainable funding. So being mindful that grant opportunities are often for a limited amount of time, so you want to have a sustainability plan, and who are those organizations that can help with that and can support those efforts. And then lastly, pilot and demonstration projects haven't always received continuation funding. And so is there a way to bridge that gap and create that, or create opportunities for continuation funding? So we are back to our light bulbs, and that should be your indication that we're at the end of a section, and we just want to encourage you to give us your questions or your comments about the topics that we just covered.
Thanks, Lori. So we're in the home stretch, and Erin, you were wanting to see the overarching themes again, and so here they are. I'm not going to talk through all of them because I feel like we have, through the course of this hour and a half, really had an opportunity, but I do want to reflect them. So local and regional rural economies need to be diversified. Some ideas around government laws and regulations that could support growth. The importance of our workforce, education, and economic community working in one voice. Making the connection between learning and paid work experiences as a way to build the talent pipeline and to re-engage young people who may be disconnected. Looking at the societal issues in the rural context. Supporting navigators that would help access public services and information that's needed throughout the rural community. Taking a look at those state grant opportunities and see how they can be more open to meeting the challenges of rural. Addressing the pros and cons of cannabis. Looking for those partnerships, creative partnerships in the rural context to achieve goals and visions, and then clear value propositions in regard to Washington's policymakers about the state's rural communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Eric to bring us home.
All right. Thank you, Beth and Lori, for summarizing the recommendations and strategies that were synthesized. We really appreciate that. For next steps, it's important to know that this is really the start of the conversation. The real power of these 4 conversations that we had in rural communities across the state is it allowed us not only to diagnose as a group some of the barriers to success that rural communities are facing, but it also really allowed us to crowdsource solutions for some of those barriers. We can't really express our appreciation enough to the folks that were in the room with us to help vision out where Washington can go in the future. Talent and Prosperity for All, the state plan, really emphasizes the for all aspect. We really, at a staff level, have a vision in the future that the next plan will help achieve impact beyond just the freeway corridors in the state. And to that end, we'll be taking the synthesized themes and recommendations and considering how those might be incorporated into the next version of the state strategic plan. There will be a written version of the recommendation and strategies that Beth and Lori and Ingrid have summarized today, which will be published in the near future. We anticipate in the next month or so. It will be available on our website publicly in conjunction with the recording of this video. We will also reach back out to participants at the 4 rural forums, as well as anybody who participated on this webinar when we have a final written product of recommendations and strategies. That document will be presented to the State Workforce Training and Education Coordinating Board, which not only, as I referenced earlier, consists of leadership in many of the large agencies responsible for administering programs in your communities, but it's actually a majority of members composed of leaders in business and the organized labor movement across the state as well, who really have an incredibly powerful role in championing many of these recommendations and strategies that were put forward today. From then, as the plan coalesces in early spring of next year, we'll go through a process of review with both the governor of the state of Washington and also the state legislature, where these concerns will be surfaced as well. Most importantly, though, this really is the start of the conversation. It's always been a critical mandate from the board that when we do a strategic planning process, we emphasize as much community engagement as possible. To that end, we will be organizing a series of public forums for the plan itself in the fall. That will be rolled out via our website, and if you would, please just make sure that you are, if you'd like to get updates, you can send us an email at the workforce@wtb.wa.gov email, and we'll make sure that you're on the email list for those future forums. Additionally, though, in one of the comments we received, one of our commenters asked, what is the plan specifically to engage with businesses and the business community? We certainly realize that engaging with employers and dealing with not only the time demands, but also the bandwidth demands of running the business on top of giving us feedback can be difficult. So we anticipate that we'll be approaching chambers of commerce around the state and very likely also Rotary organizations as a way to continue the conversation with business owners and leaders in that community so we can continue to gather input. Most importantly, though, we really want to thank you for your participation both at the forums and today. We feel really confident that the snapshot that we were able to take of Washington State was one of the most comprehensive that we've ever done in the planning process, and we look forward to being able to develop and identify resources for some of these strategies in the future. So with that, I'd like to just say thank you to all of you who participated today and added your comments. Thank you as well to our team of facilitators from Mayor and Mayor and our presenters today. And a final thank you to the Workforce Board staff who helped organize the forums, and to the Department of Labor for their generous technical assistance support in allowing us to put the forums on. So please, if you have any other feedback, email us at workforce@wtb.wa.gov. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you.